Now, as promised year 3, I'm going to continue reading the rest of the chapter. So if you remember the part we got up to, the ground had given way, Barney had fallen right to the bottom, he got tangled in loads of things falling down, and then he woke up and he was in a kind of shelter. Now, he woke up and something was there, or someone, and that's the bit I left you on the cliffhanger, and I wanted you to think about who that someone or something could be. Would it be a person, a creature, a monster? So what you can do now, you can enjoy listening to the rest of the chapter. Something or somebody had a lot of shaggy black hair and 2 bright black eyes that were looking very hard at Barney. "Hello," said Barney. Something said nothing. "I fell down the cliff," said Barney. Somebody grunted. "My name's Barney." Something made a noise that sounded like Stig. "Do you think you could help me undo my feet, Mr. Stig?" asked Barney politely. "I've got a pocket knife," he added, remembering that he had his pocket knife he found along the wood shavings on the floor of his grandfather's workshop. It was quite a good knife, except that one of the blades had come off and the other one was broken in half, or rather blunt. "Good thing I put it in my pocket," he thought. He wriggled so he could reach the knife, and he managed to open the rusty half blade. He tried to reach the creepers round his legs, but found it was difficult to cut the creepers with a blunt knife when your feet are tied above your head. The thing sitting in the corner seemed to be interested. It got up and moved towards Barney into the light. Barney was glad to see it was somebody after all. Funny way to dress though, he thought. Rabbit skins, round the middle, and no shoes or socks. "Oh, puff," said Barney. "I can't reach my feet. You do it, Stig." He's bossing Stig about, isn't he? And he handed the knife to Stig. Stig turned it over and he felt it with his strong, hairy hands and tested the edge with his thumb. Then, instead of trying to cut the creepers, he squatted down on the ground and picked up a broken stone. He's going to sharpen the knife, thought Barney. But no, it seemed more as if he was sharpening the stone. Using the hard knife to chip with, Stig was carefully flaking tiny splinters off the edge of the flint until he had a thin, sharp blade. Then he sprang up, and with 2 or 3 slashes he cut through the creepers that tied Barney's feet. Barney sat up. "Golly," he said, "you are clever. I bet my granddad couldn't do that. And he's very good at making things." Stig grinned. Then he went to the back of the cave and he hid the broken knife under a pile of rubbish. "My knife!" protested Barney, but Stig took no notice. Barney got up and went into the dark part of the cave. He'd never seen anything like the collection of bits and pieces and odds and ends, bric-a-brac and old brock, that this Stig creature had lying about his den. There were stones and bones, fossils and bottles, skins and tins, stacks of sticks and hanks of string. There were motor car tyres and hats from old scarecrows, nuts and bolts and baubles from brass bedsteads. There was a coal scuttle full of dead electric light bulbs and a basin with rusty screws and nails in it. There was a pile of bracken and newspapers that looked as if it was used for a bed. The place looked as if it had never been given a tidy up. "I wish I lived here," said Barney. Stig seemed to understand that Barney was approving of his home, and his face lit up. He took on air of the householder, showing a visitor around his property, and began pointing out some things he seemed particularly proud of. The first, the plumbing. Where the water dripped through the crack in the roof of the cave, he had wedged in the mudguard of the bicycle. The water ran along this, through the tube of the vacuum cleaner, and into a big can with writing on it. By the side of this was a plastic football carefully cut in half, and Stig dipped up some water and offered it to Barney. Barney had swallowed a mouthful before he made out the writing on the can. It said, "Weed killer." However, the water only tasted of rust and rubber. It was dark in the back of the cave. Stig went to the front where the ashes of the fire were smoking faintly, blew on them, picked up a book that lay beside his bed, tore out a page and rolled it up, lit it at the fire and carried it to a lamp set in the niche of the wall. As it flared up, Barney could see that it was in fact an old teapot. filled with some kind of oil and with a bootlace hanging out of it for a wick. In the light of the lamp, Stig went to the very back of the cave and began to thump the wall and point, and explain something in his strange, grunting language. Barney did not understand a word, but he recognised the tone of the voice, like when grown-ups go on about, "I'm thinking of tearing this down, and building on here, and having this done up here." Stig had been digging into the wall, enlarging his cave. There was a bit of an old bed he had been using as a pick, and a baby's bath full of loose chalk to be carried away. Barney made the interesting sorts of noises that you were supposed to make when people tell you you're going to put up plastic wallpaper with pictures of mousetraps on it. But Stig reached up to a bunch of turnips hanging from a poker stuck at the wall, and he handed Barney a turnip, took one for himself, and began to eat it. Barney sat down on a bundle of old magazines done up with string and munched the turnip. The turnip, at least, was fresh, and it tasted better to him than the cream of spinach he'd hidden under his spoon at dinner time. Barney looked at Stig. Funny person to find living next door to you, he thought. Stig did not seem much bigger than himself, but he looked very strong, and his hands looked cleverer than his face. But how old was he? 10? 20? 100? 1,000? You been here long? Asked Barney. Stig grinned again. Long, he said. Long, long, long. But it sounded more like an echo, or a parrot copying somebody, than an answer to his question. "I'm staying at my grandmother's house," said Barney. Stig just looked at him. "Oh well," thought Barney, "if he's not interested in talking, I don't mind," and he stood up. "I'd better go now," he said. "Thank you for having me. Can I have my knife back, please?" Stig still looked blank. "Knife," said Barney, and he made up a cutting movement with his hand. Stig picked up the sharp, worked flint from the floor of the cave and gave it to Barney. "Ooh, can I have that?" exclaimed Barney. "Thank you." He looked at the stone, hard and shiny, almost like a diamond, and much more useful. Then he put it in his pocket, said goodbye again, and went out the low door of the shelter. It was getting late in the autumn evening, and it was already dark and gloomy in the pit. Barney knew there was a way out right at the other end of the pit, and by going a long way round he could get back to his house. There were rustlings in the dry leaves and muffled sounds from the middle of bramble patches, but somehow Barney found he didn't mind. He felt the hard stone in his pocket, and he thought of Stig in his den under the cliff. You weren't likely to find anything stranger than Stig wherever you looked, and well, Stig was his friend. When he got back to the house, his grandmother and his sister Lou were just coming in from feeding the hens. "Where have you been all this time?" asked his grandmother. "I went to the chalk pit," said Barney. "All by yourself?" exclaimed Lou. "Yeah, of course," he said. "What have you been doing?" his grandmother asked. "Well, I fell and I bumped my head." "Poor old Barney," said Lou, and she laughed. "But it was all right," Barney went on, "because I met Stig." "Who's Stig?" they both asked together. "He's sort of a boy," replied Barney. "He just wears rabbit skins and he lives in a cave, and he gets his water through a vacuum cleaner and puts his chalk in the bath. He's my friend." "Good gracious," exclaimed his grandmother. "What funny friends you have, dear." "He means he's been playing cavemen," Lou exclaimed helpfully. "Stig's just a pretend friend, isn't he, Barney?" "No, he's really true," Barney protested. "Of course he's true," his grandmother smiled. "Now, Lou, don't tease Barney. Let's pretend Stig's a wicked wizard who lives in a cave and turns people into stone," Lou began eagerly. She was always inventing stories in games like that. "No," said Barney quietly, feeling the sharp flint in his pocket. "Stig's nice. He's my friend." And that night he kept the flint under his pillow. And the thought of Stig out there in his sleeping on his own bed of bracken and old newspapers. He wished he lived all the time at Granny's house so he could get to know Stig. He had to go back the day after tomorrow. Never mind, he'd visit Stig in the morning. And that is chapter 1. Now, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to post you another video discussing all about the activity for today. Have fun. See you soon.